The greatest mystery, which we have overlooked, is the mystery of the receding seas. We're saying that seas are rising because of melting snow caps and melting icebergs. We have to resolve to think for ourselves and come up with the solutions that we see around us. Certainly it's not known. The mysterious receding seas. I am Richard Guy. In this segment of the receding seas, I am going to reveal several facts concerning the Exodus that you have never heard before. You will be amazed. I will reveal just how much scholars have missed in the past as we go forward in solving the mysteries surrounding the Exodus. Ramses II, perhaps one of the greatest pharaohs who ever lived, built many monuments that survived up till today. Among his greatest achievements was the building of the city named after him, Ramses. He built the city on the Mediterranean Sea with a large harbor. The Bible account of Exodus states that the Jews gathered at the city of Ramses in preparation for their departure from Egypt. The Bible further states that after the Jews left Ramses, they filed in their thousands to Pithom, and from Pithom they crossed the Red Sea. The Red Sea was then at Pithom. Ramses and Pithom, as the Bible states, were store cities and were built by Jewish slave labor imposed by the Egyptians. The cities were used to store grain and armaments. The mystery deepens here, for there are many versions of where the Jews crossed the Red Sea, and there are accounts of them crossing what they termed the Red Sea, which was a sort of marshland area. We have to take note of the fact that Ramses was on the Mediterranean Sea, and Jews crossed the Red Sea at Pithom. The Bible tells us that in those biblical times, Pithom also had a harbor. So we know that both cities were on the sea. Further back in history, in a time before the Exodus, the Greeks sailed right past Egypt on their way to the Indian subcontinent. They were able to do this because the sea level was much higher then. It was possible to sail undisturbed from the Mediterranean to the Red Sea because the both seas met at Pithom. Let us go back even further into history to a time when Thebes was the old capital of Egypt. At that time, the sea level was much higher, and it gave Thebes access to the Red Sea. Thebes had its harbor on the Red Sea, and Egyptians could sail from Thebes to the Indian subcontinent from that harbor. It was also possible for Egyptians to sail down the Nile and enter the Mediterranean and then sail around Egypt into the Red Sea, unobstructed. After the city of Ramses was built, the Egyptians used the large harbor on the Mediterranean as it was more convenient on their way to the Indian subcontinent. The route they sailed along was the same heading as the Suez Canal today. At that time, there was only one body of water because the Mediterranean joined the Red Sea at Pithom. Over the thousands of years, the two seas have separated because both seas have ebbed lower and lower since then. The Suez Canal was only necessary because both seas have receded, leaving dry land separating them over a period of nearly 3,000 years. Ferdinand de Lesseps, a French adventurer, businessman, completed the construction of the Suez Canal in 1869. It was then possible for ships to sail from the Mediterranean Sea into the Red Sea and there gain access to the Indian Ocean and the Indian subcontinent. The feat was easily achieved 3,000 years before by the Greeks and the Phoenicians because the sea levels were higher. During the construction of the Suez Canal, the city of Ismailia was built at the halfway point along the canal in honor of the Khedive of Egypt at the time, who gave permission for the Suez Canal to be built. Archaeologists had been searching for years for the city of Ramses without success. They were following the biblical accounts of the Exodus and focusing their search on the Mediterranean coast. They were looking for the harbor at Ramses based on the historical accounts. Their efforts proved futile. there was no evidence of a harbor on the Mediterranean Sea. By a stroke of luck, a farmer plowing his field on the Nile Delta ran into a large stone which had hieroglyphs on it. When the inscriptions were translated, the archaeologists announced that they had found the lost city of Ramses. They were naturally mystified because the city had not been discovered on the Mediterranean as they had expected, but rather it was found 6 miles inland on the Nile Delta. The discovery of Ramses was made in 1883, and after finding Ramses, it was now easier to find Pithom because of the route taken by the Jews. The Bible account stated that the Jews walked along the sea coast to Pithom, and there they crossed the Red Sea. Pithom was located near to the new city of Ismailia, which is in the middle of the Suez Canal. The Jews, it was reported, crossed at Pithom. Pithom also had a harbor on the Red Sea. How do we know that the Bible account is factual? When the pharaohs noticed that the sea levels of both seas were receding, he realized that the falling sea level would cut off Egypt from the Indian Ocean. He decided to build a canal from a tributary of the Nile to Pithom so that he could still have access to the Red Sea and India. Today, the impression of the old Pharaoh Canal to Pithom can still be seen crossing the landscape and ending at Pithom, which proves that is where the Red Sea was at that time. You may visit my webpage at www.recedingsea.com for the links to view the ancient map showing the ancient canal built by the pharaohs to get from the Nile to the Red Sea at Succoth or Pithom. The problem with the canal was maintaining it. The canal kept silting up and had to be dredged continuously to keep it open. The effort to keep the canal open was an exercise in futility. The problems associated with keeping such a canal open were twofold. As the canal silted up, it had to be dredged. At one end of the canal was the Nile River and supplied water to the canal. On the other end of the canal was the Red Sea, which was ebbing lower and lower away from Pithom. In order to keep the canal open, it would have to be dredged deeper and deeper to keep up with the receding Red Sea. The depth would have to be maintained right along the canal from Pithom to the tributary of the Nile, which also had to be dredged. The outcome of all this was that the canal to Pithom proved useless after many attempts to keep it open. But it is also interesting to state here that the Greeks tried to keep the canal open, and later the Romans, and later the French. But all efforts were defeated because of the ebbing Red Sea level. What then was happening to the Mediterranean Sea? The Mediterranean was also ebbing lower and lower as the Red Sea ebbed. Naturally, there was a point where all this recession was noticed by the pharaohs and the Greeks, and hence the effort to keep the canal from the Nile to Pithom open. But then, how does this impact on the Exodus? The Jews lived and worked in Salem, and they had lived there for 400 years. They knew the area well, and they observed the transitions of the sea levels along the area where both the Mediterranean and Red Seas joined at Pithom. It is quite likely that the observation of the ebbing seas gave the Jews their plan of escape. They noticed possible that both seas had receded to such an extent that they only met at high tide. When, however, the tide was low, there was a strip of dry land which gave them an escape route to the Sinai Desert. It could also be possible that this anomaly of the low tides happened only at a certain time of the month, which gave them a corridor to pass over. You must recall here that Thebes, the ancient capital of Egypt, had a harbor on the Red Sea when the sea levels were that much higher. The harbor of Thebes has been discovered recently, and boats and boating equipment has been found in a cave along the shores of the Red Sea. The cave, however, was 80 feet above the level of the Red Sea today. Today, the Red Sea is 50 miles away from Pithom. Ismailia is 20 feet above the Red Sea today. When the Suez Canal was built in 1869, the depth for ships passing through was 22 feet drought. Since then, the canal has been dredged to 30 feet, 50 feet, 60 feet, and now the depth is 75 feet. All this dredging is done at the cost of the receding seas. In future years, the dredging has to go down to over 100 to compensate for the loss of level in both the Mediterranean and the Red Seas. So that is why the dredging of the Suez Canal is so fantastically high. Dredges have to work 24 hours a day, and the contracts are usually let out to foreign companies who have the resources to dredge. Right now, I think the contract is owned by China, and a few years ago it was Japan. Both the Mediterranean and Red Seas are receding. Their levels are ebbing relentlessly. The Suez Canal Authority has to dredge continuously against the receding sea level in both the Mediterranean and the Red Seas. The recession of both seas still go on today, and the harbors all around the world have to dredge to keep shipping lanes open. Dredging is accepted as an inevitable part of doing business in all waterways. If you ask any harbor master why they have to keep dredging, he will tell you that it is because of silt deposits from the rivers. 2,000 years ago have passed since Trajan and Nero dredged the harbor at Ostia in an attempt to keep it open. They both thought it was the silt from the Tiber. Today, nothing has changed. We still carry on the relentless battle against siltation, when in fact the real enemy is the recession of the sea. Receding seas affects all our lives. I am Richard Guy.